I bought him a $90,000 car just to hear 5 words: "I'm proud of you, Clara." Instead, he called me the family disappointment. So I gave him the DNA test results that explained why he never loved me. This isn't just about a father's rejection, it's about the day I stopped chasing love that was never real. I used to believe that all I wanted in life was success. Titles, promotions, a corner office with a view of Manhattan. But the truth is, I would have traded every accolade, every dollar, just to hear my father say 6 simple words. "Clara, I'm proud of you." Not a performative nod or a transactional compliment wrapped in conditions, just pride. Real, unfiltered pride. The kind that wraps around your shoulders like a warm coat that tells you, without question, you belong. But I never heard those words. At 33, I was a senior portfolio strategist at one of the most competitive investment firms in New York City. My recent promotion had made headlines in our industry newsletter. People called me brilliant, unstoppable, a rising star. Yet none of it mattered, not really. Because when your worth has been calibrated since childhood by one man's elusive approval, even your biggest victories echo hollow. I stood in my Manhattan apartment, suitcase half-packed on the bed, and stared at the small black envelope sitting atop my dresser. Inside, it was the key to a brand new BMW 7 Series. Black sapphire metallic, full leather interior, with every upgrade my father had once admired in hushed tones at a country club event. It had taken nearly half my annual bonus, but I hadn't blinked. To anyone else, it was an extravagant gift. To me, it was a final Hail Mary. Father's Day was approaching, and with it, the annual Monroe family reunion in suburban Virginia. Every June, my father, David Monroe, hosted what could only be described as a hybrid between a gala and a tribal ceremony. It was more than a dinner, it was a legacy showcase. My father was a real estate mogul, a self-made empire builder with a spine of steel and a voice that turned conference rooms into confessionals. To the world, he was admirable. To his inner circle, he was commanding. To his children, he was something else entirely. My brother Logan had followed in his footsteps: Stanford MBA, real estate firm partner by 30, the kind of son who made David puff his chest at country club brunches. I had taken a different path. Finance, not real estate. New York, not Virginia. Investment banking instead of construction deals. It was success, yes, but the wrong flavor. That was the story of my life. Right achievement, wrong script. I zipped up my suitcase and glanced around the room, wondering why I felt like I was preparing for a trial instead of a family celebration. The answer, of course, was buried in decades of micro-rejections. When I made honor roll in high school, he asked why I didn't win the science fair. When I got a full ride to NYU, he asked why I didn't choose UVA like Logan. When I landed my first 6-figure job, he called it play money compared to owning tangible assets. The higher I climbed, the more inventive his dismissals became. Even now, with my name on a glass office door and a team of 12 reporting to me, I still felt like a little girl in patent leather shoes holding up a perfect report card to a man who barely looked up. I picked up the envelope. The key weighed more than it should. I imagined placing it in his hand, imagined the flicker of surprise on his face the moment he realized this wasn't just a gift, it was a plea. A transaction, yes, but one where I was bartering material for meaning. What would he say? I didn't expect tears. My father didn't do emotion. But maybe, just maybe, he would place a firm hand on my shoulder and say something like, "You've done well, Clara, I'm proud of the woman you've become." And maybe that would be enough. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city that had shaped me. I thought about how far I'd come, how much I'd built on my own, no family name pulling strings, no old boys network making introductions. Just grit, spreadsheets, sleepless nights, and a stubborn refusal to be invisible. And yet, visibility had never equaled value. Not with him. The car was scheduled for delivery to a dealership 15 minutes from my parents' house. I'd arranged everything with military precision. My hope was to hand him the key in private, away from the theatrical performance of the reunion. No audience. Just father and daughter. A chance. I ran my fingers along the edge of the envelope one last time before sliding it into my purse. I wasn't naive, I knew what I was walking into, but even knowing that, I couldn't stop myself. Because when your heart has been trained to see love as something earned, not given, you'll spend a lifetime paying in advance. I turned off the lights, locked the door behind me, and headed to the airport. Somewhere deep inside, a flicker of a child's voice still whispered, "Maybe this time, he'll see me." And that, somehow, was enough to try again. The flight to Virginia felt heavier than the plane itself. Each mile south tugged at the roots I thought I'd severed. But family ties aren't cut with distance, they tangle, tighten, grow thorny. I stepped out of the rental car onto the gravel driveway of my childhood home, a sweeping estate nestled behind iron gates and manicured hedges. The Monroe house wasn't built for comfort, it was built for admiration. White-columned, red-bricked, symmetrical as a magazine spread. A place where everything looked perfect, but nothing ever felt safe. I hadn't even reached the door when it opened. There he stood, David Monroe. My father. He wore what he always wore. A navy blazer, pressed khakis, loafers shined to military standards. His posture was straight, his expression unreadable. His eyes briefly flicked toward the BMW 7 Series parked just behind me, then returned to my face without acknowledgement. "You're early," he said, as if I'd broken protocol. Not a hug, not a smile. Just the time. "Wanted to beat traffic," I replied evenly, trying not to wilt. He stepped aside without a word, allowing me in. The house smelled the same cedar polish, citrus cleaner, a faint trace of his cologne. The air itself felt formal, stiff, like the walls knew they had to impress someone. My heels echoed on the marble tile as I walked in. My mother, Elaine, emerged from the hallway. Soft beige sweater, pearls, eyes that flickered with nervous warmth. She wrapped me in a gentle hug that felt like an apology. "You look tired, darling," she whispered. A euphemism. Her way of saying, "I see you've been fighting again." "Long flight," I lied. Then she vanished into the kitchen, always disappearing before confrontation could touch her. I placed my purse gently on the console table. The key was inside. I could feel its weight pressing through the leather like a heartbeat. I didn't mention it. Not yet. Logan arrived shortly after. My younger brother. The prodigal son with perfect posture and effortless charm. He waltzed in with stories of zoning ordinances and commercial expansion. Dad lit up. "Told you the rezoning would triple the margin," Logan said, handing him a folder. David beamed. "That's my boy." 3 words. A casual phrase. And yet, I felt them like a blade. No one had ever called me his girl. I stood there, as present as the furniture. At dinner, it was the same old choreography. Logan led, Dad praised, Mom smiled, and I filled the silence like background music. I spoke about a Tokyo merger I'd helped secure $300 million in cross-border investment. David waved a hand. "Japanese markets are fickle. Real estate, that's something you can touch. It lasts." I said nothing. Just sliced my salmon a little too hard. Afterward, I wandered upstairs, past the trophy case that wrapped around the hallway like a shrine. Football plaques, debate ribbons, framed articles about Logan's business accolades. At the bottom corner, hidden behind a dusty vase, I found my academic decathlon medal from high school. Bronze. Crooked. I remembered when I brought it home. I was 15. Beaming, proud. "You let a boy beat you?" Dad had said. "Don't ever let your gender be an excuse." That sentence carved itself into my bones. When I declared finance as my major, he sighed. "Tough field. Emotional types don't survive long." When I bought my Manhattan apartment, he called it a trendy shoebox. Annette. When I got promoted to vice president, he asked if I was their diversity win. Every milestone I reached, he painted with doubt, like my success was counterfeit because it didn't come stamped with his approval. Back downstairs, I passed the den. My father and Logan stood over blueprints. Their laughter rolled out like thunder. I hovered for a second, then walked away. In the hallway, my mother was arranging flowers. Tulips, always tulips. Mom, I said softly. Did you ever think maybe I wasn't the problem? She paused, then lowered her eyes to the vase. Your father. He sees the world in his own way. That's not an answer. She flinched like I'd slapped her. It was different when we were young, she murmured. I didn't have many choices. You still don't choose now. Her hands trembled slightly. He loves you, Clara. He just doesn't know how to show it. No, Mom, I said, voice low. He doesn't love me. He tolerates me. And only because he has to. She blinked hard. I turned away. Later that night, I sat on the guest bed, staring at the purse on the chair. Inside was a $90,000 gesture. I had imagined the moment 100 times. Me handing him the key. His surprise. His pride. But now? Now I couldn't imagine giving anything to a man who had given me nothing but questions. Why aren't you more like Logan? Why didn't you stay closer? Why aren't you enough? Maybe the better question was, why had I kept trying? The door creaked open. It was my father. He stood there silently for a moment, then said, Don't be late tomorrow, the Stevensons are coming early. That was it. I nodded. He left. I closed the door and leaned against it, heart heavy. Some people return home to rest. I returned home to rebleed. And for the first time, I began to wonder, was I offering a gift to earn love? Or had I been trained, since childhood, to confuse pain with loyalty? The key stayed in my purse that night. But something else began to unlock. The next morning began like every other Monroe family event, formal, efficient, and emotionally sterile. Sunlight filtered through the tall bay windows of the dining room, dancing on polished silverware and white china. The table was set for 20. My father liked numbers. He liked symmetry. He liked control. I waited until the guests thinned, until the moment felt private enough. David Monroe stood by the grand piano in the foyer, sipping black coffee from a porcelain cup. I approached quietly, the envelope tucked in my hand, my pulse louder than my footsteps. Dad, I said. Can I talk to you for a second? He turned, expression unreadable. Yes? I held out the black envelope. He took it, opened it, pulled out the key. There was a beata fraction of a second when his brow lifted. A flicker, then, gone. This is the BMW? He asked flatly. Black sapphire. M Sport, I thought you'd like it. He turned the key over in his fingers, eyes narrowing. It's expensive. I hesitated. I wanted to do something special. Clara, he said, voice calm but edged, I hope you didn't bankrupt yourself to impress me. That kind of gesturate's not necessary. A bit flashy, don't you think? Flashy. I swallowed hard. Before I could respond, Logan's voice rang out from across the room. He strolled in with a smirk, a drink in hand. He won't drive it, he said. Come on, Clara, you know him. He hates German cars. Besides, this feels more like a PR stunt than a gift. He laughed. No one else did. David handed the key back to Menot with anger, not even disdain. Just disinterest. Like he was returning a receipt. You should keep it, he said. You earned it. I nodded. Okay. And that was it. No thank you, no smile, no pride. Just rejection. Again. I walked outside and stood on the porch, the warm June air thick with the scent of cut grass and roses. My chest ached in that old familiar way, tight, hot, hollow. I had imagined this moment so many times. I had pictured his eyes lighting up. His voice softening. A rare smile breaking through the armor. Instead, I felt like a door had quietly closed. And locked. That night, I sat cross-legged on the guest bed, phone pressed to my ear. My best friend, Mia, picked up on the second ring. You did what? She gasped. I gave him the car. Clara. It didn't go well. No shit. I laughed, but it came out brittle. He said it was too flashy. Logan said it was a PR stunt. What did you say? Nothing. Why not? I didn't want to look desperate. Mia was silent for a moment. Clara, you were desperate. I know. Another silence. I'm thinking about taking it back. Do it. But then, it's like admitting it mattered. That I cared what he thought. You do care what he thinks. That's not weakness, that's damage. I closed my eyes. I spent $90,000 on hope. Number. You spent $90,000 on grief. The line went quiet again. She didn't need to say more. After we hung up, I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. I thought about every bonus check I had carefully saved, every hour I had worked late, every client I had charmed just to afford that car. But really, I wasn't buying metal or horsepower. I was buying proximity. To love, to approval, to worth. In my mind, I repeated the sentence I hadn't been able to say out loud. I didn't buy the car to impress you, Dad. I bought it because I didn't know any other way to reach you. Because words had never been our bridge. Because affection was never his language. Because all my life, love had been something I had to earn with grades, with promotions, with perfection. I thought about when I was 8, and he skipped my ballet recital to close a land deal. When I was 15, and he missed my graduation speech because Logan had a tennis tournament. When I was 27, and he told a room full of friends that he had one real successor. Logan. I'd been trying to buy my way into his heart because I didn't believe I belonged there. And now, the final transaction had failed. He didn't reject the car. He rejected what it represented. Me. I rose from the bed and walked over to the dresser where I had placed the envelope again. The key sat silently inside, gleaming, untouched. Unclaimed. I picked it up, held it tight in my palm. I whispered to no one. I didn't spend 90 grand on a car, I spent it on a maybe. Oh, why? Maybe he'd see me. Maybe he'd say it. Maybe he'd be proud. But maybe was a child's currency. And I was tired of being a child in my father's house. The envelope had been sitting on my kitchen counter for 3 weeks before I left for Virginia. I'd requested the DNA kit out of curiosity, nothing more or so I told myself. I hadn't expected anything unusual. The email arrived the night before the flight, and I hadn't opened it. Now, back in the guest room of my childhood home, I sat cross-legged on the bed, staring at the screen of my laptop. Paternity not confirmed. The words were sterile. Scientific. They didn't scream or accuse, they simply existed. David Monroe was not my biological father. I reread the results 3 times, then closed the laptop. The silence in the room was deafening. Outside, the estate grounds buzzed with early summer crickets and distant laughter from the porch. But inside me, there was a stillness I couldn't name. Not shock. Not sorrow. Something colder. Something older. It wasn't grief, it was confirmation. My whole life, I'd tried to earn a place that was never mine to begin with. At first, I did nothing. I didn't cry, I didn't call anyone. I simply sat still, letting the truth wrap itself around my spine. Then the memories started coming faint, sharp, painful. I remembered being 5 and offering David a crayon drawing that said, "Best Daddy." He'd looked at it, nodded, and said, "Next time, stay inside the lines." I remembered being 10, sick with the flu, asking him to stay home from work. He'd replied, "Meetings don't stop because you have a fever." I remembered being 14 and writing him a letter I never sent. A letter I'd stuffed into a shoebox under my bed. A letter that began, "I don't know what I did wrong, but I want you to see me." On. I rose slowly and walked over to the closet, heart pounding. The shoebox was still there, absurdly intact after nearly 2 decades. Inside, old birthday cards, friendship bracelets, and that letter folded carefully in pink-lined paper written in my rounded teenage scrawl. I unfolded it with trembling hands. "Dear Dad, I know I'm not like Logan. I'm not good at sports, I don't like talking in front of people. But I work really hard. I try to be good. I try to make you proud. Sometimes I think maybe you don't see me. But I see you. I see how you smile at Logan and ask him about his games. I see how you pat his shoulder. I wish you would do that to me just once. I don't need a trophy or a speech. I just want you to like me. Love. Clara. Reading it as an adult was like looking through a window into a wound that never closed. That girl had begged for attention with the quiet desperation of someone who already knew it wouldn't come. I sat on the floor and pressed the letter to my chest. And then I wept not for the lie, but for the years I had spent trying to make a lie feel like home. Eventually, the tears dried into something more jagged. Anger. But it wasn't the raw, childish anger of being unloved. It was the sharp clarity of someone who realized they had been manipulated. Because now, with this truth in hand, I saw it all differently. David hadn't just been cold, he'd been calculating. He must have known. My mother must have told him, or he must have suspected. How else do you explain that level of distance? That mechanical brand of tolerance disguised as fatherhood? He hadn't failed to love me by accident. He had withheld it intentionally, systematically, as if I were a guest overstaying my welcome. This wasn't about biology, it was about control. And I'd spent 3 decades trying to earn a love that had been withheld not because I wasn't enough but because I wasn't his. The thought made me dizzy. I stood, paced the room, then returned to the laptop. I pulled up the DNA report again. No matches to David's lineage. But one unexpected name. Thomas Keller. 61. Lives in Chicago. A high genetic probability. A biological parent. I closed the laptop. My heart was racing, but not from fear, from liberation. For the first time, the rejection didn't feel personal. It felt strategic. And suddenly, I wasn't a broken daughter. I was a woman who had been lied to. The next morning, I sat across from my mother in the sunroom. She was stirring cream into her tea, eyes fixed on the garden. I watched her for a moment, wondering what version of the truth she had carried all these years. "Mom," I said quietly. "Can I ask you something personal?" Her hand paused mid-stir. "Of course." "Is David my father?" The spoon clinked softly against the china. She didn't look at me. She didn't ask what I meant. She didn't pretend to misunderstand. Instead, she set the cup down gently and pressed a hand to her chest. "I was young," she whispered, "and scared." I said nothing. Let her fill the silence with what needed to be said. I met Thomas at university. He was kind, brilliant, a little wild. We weren't careful, and then David proposed. My parents adored him. They said marrying into the Monroe family would secure everything. "So you married him, pregnant?" She nodded, eyes brimming. "He knew, but he said he'd raise you as his own, as long as it never came up again." I leaned back. The air between us was different now, thinner, sharper. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her lip trembled. "Because I thought he'd come around. That maybe one day, he'd see you like he saw Logan." But he didn't. "No," she said, voice cracking. "He didn't." I stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the garden where Logan and David were throwing a football like an old commercial for fatherhood. A stranger and his son. I didn't belong in this picture. And for once, I didn't want to. The dining room had been transformed into something almost regal. A long mahogany table stretched across the room like a runway, dressed in white linen, crystal goblets, and floral centerpieces tall enough to hide behind. The annual Father's Day banquet was always more performance than tradition. And David Monroe? He was the star. Around the table sat extended family, business associates, golf buddies from the country club, even a state senator he liked to name drop. Logan, of course, was seated to his right where the heir belonged. I was 3 seats down, barely visible behind a bouquet of white lilies. Dinner was a string quartet of polite laughter and steak knives tapping porcelain. I barely touched my food. My fingers brushed against my purse every few minutes, checking, confirming the envelope was still there. The DNA results. My silence had become its own kind of scream. Then, as dessert plates were cleared and champagne flutes were refilled, David Monroe stood. He didn't need to raise his voice. He had presence. The room quieted, as if a spell had been cast. "I just want to say a few words," he began, lifting his glass. Here it comes, I thought. The part where he praises Logan, subtly demeans me, and basks in admiration. "I'm proud of my children," he said, gaze sweeping slowly across the room. "Proud of the way they carry the Monroe name into the world." Do all. A few polite nods. Some scattered claps. "But pride isn't about achievements," he continued. "It's about character. Integrity. Grit. I look at my son Logan and I see someone who understands what it means to lead, to build, to uphold a legacy." He turned toward Logan and raised his glass. "To the future of this family." More claps now. Fuller. Logan smiled, half modest, fully smug. Then David added, "Of course, not every child grasps that. Some chase accolades, appearances, titles with no substance. It's not about success, it's about backbone, and that can't be bought." Silence. Cold, sharp, heavy. The kind of silence that chokes. I sat frozen, the words ricocheting in my skull. Not every child. Backbone can't be bought. He never said my name. He didn't need to. Everyone at that table knew exactly who he meant. My mother stared down at her lap. My chest rose and fell, shallow, fast. My face burned. And then quietly, deliberately I stood. The sound of my chair scraping back was the only thing anyone heard. I didn't lift my glass. I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope. My hands didn't shake. Not anymore. I walked to the head of the table, where David stood holding his champagne. I placed the envelope directly in front of him. "What's this?" he asked, eyebrows raised. "Proof," I said. "Of something I've always felt but never had the words for." He didn't move. Just stared at me, one hand still resting on the glass, the other hovering near the envelope. I turned to the room. "For those of you who don't know me well, maybe that's most of you, I'm Clara, David's daughter. At least, that's what I believed." A few murmurs. A few forks frozen midair. For 33 years, I tried to earn a place at this table. I worked hard. I succeeded, but it was never enough. Not for him. I looked at David. He hadn't opened the envelope yet. I thought it was because I chose a different path, finance instead of real estate, New York instead of Virginia. But that's not it, is it? He said nothing. "I'm not your daughter, at least, not biologically. That envelope confirms it, and yet, I spent my whole life trying to make you proud." The room had gone still, even the air seemed to pause. My mother let out a sound half-gasp, half-sobbing, slumped slightly in her chair. An aunt rushed to her side. David finally spoke. "Clara, this is neither the time nor the place." "No." I cut in, calm, steady. "The time and place is every single moment you had a chance to love me and chose not to. Every chance you had to say, 'I see you.' And you didn't." His face reddened. "You're making a scene. I'm making a choice." And then I said the words I hadn't allowed myself to even whisper until now. "I used to wish you were proud of me. But now I realize I'm proud of myself. And I don't need your permission anymore." "Olu." I turned, my eyes landing briefly on Logan. His face had gone pale. I walked away from the table, past the guests, past the gasps, past the whispered questions. Out the door, into the open air. The evening light hit my skin like absolution. For the first time in my life, I felt weightless. Because I had given him every chance. And now I was done giving. The night air hit me like a wave of truth. Cool, cleansing, and just a little bit cruel. Behind me, the Monroe estate glowed like a theater's stage lights on, voices muffled, doors closed. Inside, they were probably still sitting in stunned silence, glasses still raised, forks poised midair. The illusion had cracked, and no one quite knew what to do with the pieces. I walked across the driveway, heels crunching over gravel, each step shedding a layer I no longer wanted to carry. Then I heard it. "Clara." David's voice. Sharp. Commanding. I didn't stop walking. Clara, wait. Oh. I turned slightly, enough to see him standing at the front steps, hands on his hips, eyes narrowed in the dim porch light. He looked smaller somehow, silhouetted against the house he ruled. But he didn't rule me anymore. I'm not doing this, I said, almost to myself. Come back inside, we'll talk. No, I said softly, we won't. He took a step forward. You can't just walk away. Yes, I can. You're making a mistake. Oh. I paused, looked him dead in the eyes across the night air, and said the words I had waited my whole life to say. No, Dad. The mistake was thinking I needed your permission to be whole. Then I turned and unlocked the car. The BMW greeted me with a quiet chime as I slid into the driver's seat. The leather was cool, the console glowing soft blue. I took a breath, placed both hands on the wheel, and started the engine. The sound of it was beautiful. I pulled out slowly, not in a rush. The long driveway curved past manicured hedges and marble statues, like a corridor designed to make you feel small. But I didn't feel small anymore. As I turned onto the main road, the house disappeared behind me in the rearview mirror. I watched it shrink and dissolve into the darkness, a castle made of expectations and silence. Gone. The farther I drove, the more the tension in my body began to unravel. My jaw loosened. My shoulders sank back. My lungs remembered how to breathe. And then it hit me. The strangest thing. Relief. Not the triumph I thought I might feel. Not victory or revenge. Just release. It was as if I had been holding my breath for 3 decades and finally let it go. The trees blurred past. The road stretched ahead like a ribbon of possibility. And somewhere between mile marker 12 and 13, I began to cry. Not out of sadness. Out of recognition. Because for the first time, I wasn't crying for what I had lost. I was crying for what I had survived. All those years, I thought I was chasing pride. His pride. His approval. I thought if I just worked harder, achieved more, stayed quiet, stayed good, I would earn my place. But the truth was simpler. I had been competing in a race I was never meant to win. A rigged game. A fixed script. And tonight, I'd walked off the stage. Cả đời tôi là một cuộc thi giành lấy sự chấp nhận. I whispered to the dark, the rhythm of my tires humming in agreement. Cuộc thi kết thúc rồi. I smiled through tears. The stars above were clear, the night open. I rolled down the window and let the wind touch my face. It felt like being baptized by freedom. For so long, I thought leaving meant giving up. But now I understood. Leaving was the beginning. And the road ahead was finally mine. 2 days after I left the Monroe estate, I received a text from my mother. Can we talk? Just you and me. No pressure. I owe you something. I hesitated before replying. But curiosity, and something gentler compassion, maybe nudged me toward a yes. We met at a small cafe on the edge of town, far from the prying eyes of country club gossip. She wore sunglasses despite the cloudy weather, and her hands trembled slightly as she stirred her tea. I wasn't brave, she began, voice barely above the hum of conversation. Not when it mattered most. I didn't speak. I let the silence do what words couldn't. I was 22 when I met Thomas Parker, she said. He was electric. Brilliant. Kind. He made me feel seen in a way I'd never felt before. I nodded slowly. The name matched the DNA report. A match I hadn't told her about yet. I got pregnant, she continued. My parents were horrified. It was 1989. A child out of wedlock could ruin everything. Your grandfather made a few calls. David Monroe was looking for a wife, someone presentable, someone from the right family. It was convenient. You married him? While pregnant? She nodded, shame curling her shoulders. He agreed to raise you. On one condition, we never speak of Thomas again. Not to anyone. Not even to you. I took a slow breath. Did he ever love me? She blinked hard. I think he wanted to. But he couldn't separate you from the man he resented. It landed like a cold truth. I had been collateral in someone else's ambition. I'm sorry, she whispered, reaching across the table. I should have told you sooner. You deserve to know where you came from. I didn't pull away. But I didn't lean in either. Later that night, I sat in a quiet hotel room and Googled Thomas Parker, Chicago. It didn't take long. LinkedIn gave me the basics. Mechanical engineer. 61. Illinois Institute of Technology alumnus. Still working. Divorced. A company bio added that he volunteered on weekends teaching robotics to underprivileged teens. He had kind eyes in his photo. Warm, weathered. A face that looked like it had laughed more than it had frowned. I hovered over the message button for an hour. Then I clicked. 2 weeks later, I stood outside a brick house in a quiet neighborhood in northwest Chicago. Tree-lined street. Kids playing basketball down the block. A wind chime danced lazily in the breeze. Thomas opened the door before I knocked. He looked just like the photo but older, more tired, more real. Clara, he asked. I nodded. Hi. He didn't hug me. Just stepped aside and said, come in. The living room was modest. Bookshelves overflowing. A model airplane on the mantel. 2 cats curled on the windowsill. We sat. 2 strangers. One enormous truth. I didn't know, he said, eyes wet. Not until your message, Elaine, she never told me. I figured. She said she loved me, and then she disappeared. I thought she'd changed her mind. Moved on. I never imagined. He trailed off. You don't owe me anything, I said quickly. I didn't come here for that. Then why did you come? I paused, searching for something honest. Because I wanted to see if you were real. He smiled. I'm real. Flawed. Awkward. But real. We sat in the quiet for a long time. Then he asked, what do you do? Finance. Investment strategy. He nodded slowly. Smart, you get that from your mother. She was terrifying with numbers. I laughed. The first real laugh in weeks. Then he said, softly, you look just like her when you smile. I froze. No one had ever said that to me. Not David. Not even Elaine. You don't have to call me Dad, he added quickly. I don't expect that, I'm glad you're here. I didn't cry, but I wanted to. We talked for an hour. Then 2. About books. Music. Travel. He told me about his volunteer work, about a student who'd won a national competition using a robot they'd built together. It's not about machines, he said. It's about giving someone a reason to believe in their own mind. Oh, and I realized he'd spent his life giving what I'd spent mine searching for. When I stood to leave, he asked if he could hug me. I nodded. His embrace was unsure, hesitant but genuine. I hope this isn't the only time, he said. It won't be, I replied. As I walked away, I felt a strange mix of lightness and ache. He hadn't raised me. He hadn't known me. But he didn't flinch when I arrived. He didn't need proof or performance. He just saw me. And for the first time, that was enough. Healing didn't happen all at once. It came in quiet waves, some gentle, some sharp. There was no grand revelation, no cinematic closure. Just small choices, made daily, that began to feel like something stronger than survival. A month after returning from Chicago, I sold the BMW. It had sat idle in the garage, still gleaming, still untouched. Every time I looked at it, I didn't see a car, I saw a wound. A symbol of a love I tried to buy and a silence I had finally broken. I transferred the money, almost the full value, into a fund for a nonprofit that supported women recovering from emotional trauma rooted in family dynamics. A small organization in Queens that ran group therapy, job training, housing support. It wasn't an act of charity. It was an offering. To the younger me. To the girl who once thought her worth could be bought with achievements, who measured love in crumbs, and still starved. I didn't tell anyone. Not David, not Logan, not even Thomas. It wasn't for them. Logan, for his part, never reached out. He sent one text, days after the Father's Day dinner. It read, "Not sure what happened, but hope you're okay." I never replied. It wasn't anger, it was space. Some relationships aren't meant to be fixed, they're meant to be left behind, like clothes you've outgrown. David Monroe remained David Monroe. He didn't call, didn't write. At first, I heard through a cousin that he claimed the DNA test was flawed, that it was manipulated, that I had been influenced by emotional instability. I didn't respond. Let him keep his version. I had mine. Oddly, it was my mother who changed the most. She began calling once a week tentatively, respectfully. She never apologized directly for the years of silence, but she listened. That was new. One afternoon, we sat together at a small cafe in Manhattan. She had taken the train up alone. "I've been thinking," she said softly, stirring her tea, "about how much I let happen just by staying quiet." I didn't answer. "I thought silence was protection," she continued. "But now I see it's just another kind of harm." I looked at her, truly looked. She was aging. Slower in her movements. But her eyes held something unfamiliar. Bravery. "I can't undo what I didn't say," she added. "But if you'll let me, I'd like to start saying what matters now." I nodded. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was something real. With Thomas, the pace was slow. We exchanged emails, shared photos. He sent me a copy of a book he loved on engineering for social good. I sent him a photo of me at 16 with braces and a science trophy. He texted back, "You had that spark even then, it shows." We didn't talk about the gap. We didn't pretend he'd been there for birthdays or broken hearts. Instead, we spoke of now movies we liked, cities we'd visited, questions about how I liked my coffee. Simple things. Building blocks. He never asked me to call him Dad. I never offered. And yet, there was something undeniably paternal in the way he remembered my favorite color, or how he signed off emails with, "Be safe, kiddo." One afternoon, I visited his workshop. He showed me how to solder a wire into a tiny robot circuit board. "You're a fast learner," he said. I smiled. "Guess I get that from someone." He laughed. And I did, too. It wasn't a second chance. It was a first one finally allowed to happen. As summer gave way to fall, I found myself softer. Less reactive, less eager to prove. I didn't need to be enough anymore. I just needed to be. There were still hard days. Days when old narratives resurfaced, when I heard David's voice in my head questioning my decisions, mocking my achievements. But now, I knew what to say back. "You don't get to narrate my story anymore." It was a Sunday morning in late October, the kind of crisp New York day when the sun slices through the windows just enough to warm the floorboards. I was curled up on the couch with a blanket, my coffee just beginning to cool, when I opened the message. It had come through my inbox tied to the nonprofit I now volunteered with, a quiet role, mostly mentoring women rebuilding their lives after abuse, neglect, or long stretches of emotional silence. Sometimes, I shared pieces of my story. Not the scandalous parts, the honest ones. This message came from a 22-year-old girl named Rachel. A stranger. But her words landed like truth I'd been waiting to hear. "Dear Clara, I watched a video where someone mentioned your story about your father, your DNA test, the car, the toast, everything. I cried for hours. My dad used to call me useless. I believed him. Until I heard how you walked away, not just from a house but from a lie. I left home yesterday. I'm scared. But also free. Thank you for being someone I didn't even know I needed." I read the message 3 times. Then I put the phone down and cried. Not because I was sad. Because something in me had shifted. All those years I had hunted for one phrase, "I'm proud of you," from one man. And in the end, it came from a girl I'd never met. And it meant more. Because it wasn't laced in power. It wasn't earned through performance. It was witnessed. Truthfully, I used to believe healing came with grand gestures. Fireworks. Breakdowns turned into breakthroughs. But now, I knew better. Healing looked like quiet mornings and unread messages that turn into meaning. It looked like empty space on your calendar that didn't make you feel like you were disappearing. It looked like laughing at your own reflection and not needing someone else to confirm that it was enough. 6 months had passed since I walked away from the Monroe estate. In that time, I had stopped wearing my old watch, the one David gave me on my graduation day with a speech about time being the most valuable asset. Now I wore a leather band I'd bought at a craft fair. It didn't tick, but it reminded me to stay present. I had stopped checking LinkedIn every morning, desperate for metrics to tell me I was moving fast enough. I still worked, still thrived. But now, I also paused. I walked more. I painted, badly. I let myself be mediocre at things that didn't need to become achievements. My apartment felt warmer somehow. Not because anything changed physically, but because I'd stopped furnishing it for approval. One afternoon, Thomas sent me a postcard. Just a picture of a lake from a hiking trail in Wisconsin, with 3 words on the back. "You'd love this." He didn't sign it, Dad. He didn't need to. I had stopped needing labels. One evening, my mother and I made pasta together. She asked if I remembered how she used to burn toast. I laughed. Then she said, "I want to know who you were before all of this. Before you learned to be quiet." It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever said to me. I didn't answer her that night. But I started writing. A memoir, maybe. Or just a collection of notes to the girl I used to be. I titled it, "Things I Know Now That No One Taught Me." On the first page, I wrote, "You don't have to audition for love. The ones who see you won't need a spotlight." And one morning, as I got ready for a small conference I was speaking at, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Hair slightly messy. Sleeves rolled. Lips bare. Eyes focused. I stood still. In the past, I would have tilted my head, wondering what my father would have said would I pass his test today. But I didn't do that. Instead, I looked at myself, really looked. Not to critique. Not to compete. Just to see. And I smiled. A quiet, knowing smile. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to become someone else's daughter. I was just Clara. And that was enough.